Hi friends, my name is Jess. Welcome back to my channel, Books Past Bedtime. Today we are going to be doing a very exciting video. I am going to be talking about my 2020 reading stats, and I'm also going to be going over the goals that I had in 2020 and whether or not I met them throughout the year. I love stats videos. I love tracking my reading. I don't know why, it just gets me going. I just love it. So I hope you guys love it as much as me because I'm very excited to share all of my reading stats with you, and I hope you enjoy. So let's just jump right into it. So first we're just going to go over some basics. I set my Goodreads goal at 150 books in 2020, and I met and exceeded that. I ended up reading a total of 186 books in the year of 2020. This is the most books I've ever read, so this is really awesome. I'm very happy with this number, very excited with it, and I think a lot of it was due to the fact that this was the first year I didn't have a single semester of school, so that definitely helped with more reading time, and also obviously COVID and everything. I was out of work for a little bit, so that definitely helped me get some more reading in, more than usual. For the past like 5-6 years that I've been tracking my reading, I have read more every single year than I have the last year, and I think 2021 is probably going to be the year that I break that streak, which is really sad, but there's just more stuff going on this year. I am back to working full time and adjusting to that schedule, so I think this is probably one of the highest numbers that I will ever see, but I'm very happy with it and very proud of it. So looking at this figure of 186 books, that breaks down to about an average of 15.5 books a month. I was reading quite a lot. It's almost like a book every 2 days, I think is how it kind of works out that way, but just because that was the average doesn't mean I actually read that many books each month. And so let's break it down by month. In January I read 13 books, in February I read 11, in March I read 12, and then I started being really consistent on BookTube in April, so I read 24 books that month, and that is the highest number of the year, which was really awesome. In May I read 17 books, and in June I read 19, in July I read 13, August I read 16, September I read 21, which was my second best reading month of the year, and then in October I read 14 books, in November I read 13, and in December I read 13 again. In terms of pages, I read 59,155 pages. This includes every single book that I read, even the books I listen on audio. I count them all in my page count because I just think it's interesting. Like, that's what makes the most sense to my brain. I definitely read less in the second half of the year than I did in the first half of the year. In the first half of the year, I read almost 35,000 pages, while in the second half of the year, I only read like 25,000, but that's still a lot of pages, so I'm doing all right. This breaks down to about 162 pages per day, which is awesome. That's almost like 2.5-3 hours of reading for me, but that is down from the figure that I had in June. When June rolled around, I had been reading about 187 pages per day is what the average was, so it dropped down about 20-25 pages, but that's okay. The second half of the year was a little bit weirder for me than the first half, and at the end of the day, I still read a ton of great books in 2020, so I'm not mad about it at all. Although I did include my audiobooks in my page count, I also tracked how many hours I listened to audiobooks, and in 2020, I listened to 810 hours of audiobooks, which is literally insane. This breaks down to 33 days and 18 hours of audiobooks that I listened to in 2020. Like, just think about that, like almost 34 whole 24-hour days I spent listening to audiobooks in 2020. That's over a month. I spent over a month of my life listening to audiobooks. That is insane. Not to mention all the podcasts I listen to. Like, do I do anything? What is wrong with me? But if we break it down by day, it seems a little bit more manageable. It's about an average of 2 hours and 15 minutes a day of listening to audiobooks, and I listen to most of mine on 2 times speed, so then that's just about an hour of listening to an audiobook every single day, which doesn't seem that bad, but when you put it all together, man, like, it sounds like I'm wasting my life away. Let's move on from that. So let's put up my format graph so you can see the breakdown of how I consumed these books. So 40.3 books I read were physical copy this past year, and 43.5% were audio, so I read just a little bit more audiobooks than I did physical books, but those were about equal. And then the lowest category was ebooks at 16.1%. I really don't prefer ebooks. They're not my favorite thing to read, so I don't read a ton of them, but I did read some. Moving on to age group, I think this was the first year of my life where I read more adult books than YA books, which is awesome. That's kind of the direction I'm trying to move in, as I am 23, if you didn't know, so I'm an adult technically. It's not very fun being an adult, but I'm an adult. And I have really found myself liking and relating more to adult books recently, so I'd like to keep up that trend. I still love my YAs. A lot of them now I do feel like they're not quite as universally relatable to me, but still definitely enjoy them in moderation. Almost half of the books that I read in 2020 were adult books at 47.8%. My next highest category was obviously YA at 35.5%. I also read 10.8% middle grade / children's. I think this reading tracker I was using broke them in half, but I just combined them because I don't really know why I put some as children's and some as middle grade. I didn't read any picture books. I don't know. Doesn't matter. And then I did read a couple new adult books this year, which is like a very new genre for me. I kind of like it. Mostly I count like romances as new adult. But anyway, 5.9% of the books that I read in 2020 were new adult. Now we can talk a little bit about author, gender, and identity. Overwhelmingly, most of the books that I read in 2020 were written by females. I read 75.8% of my books were written by females, which am I supposed to be mad about that stat? Because I'm really not. Like, then I did read a book or two by a trans or non-binary author, and those books made up 0.5% of my reading. I also broke my author identity down into cisgender and non-cisgender people, and so I read 96.2% of books written by cisgendered people and 3.8% books written by trans, gender fluid, genderqueer, intersex authors. That's author identity. I definitely would like to have, like I said, more trans, non-binary, intersex, genderqueer authors represented next year, so that's definitely something I'm going to focus on. The same goes for diversity. I really was trying to read more diversely in 2020, but I definitely didn't do as well as I wanted to, and so I definitely want to continue that and continue to hit it harder in 2021. So hopefully my stats will look even better at the end of this year, but I am going to show them to you now in full transparency. In 2020, 86% of the books that I read were by white authors and 14% were by authors of color. This is actually better than the stats that I gave you in June, the halfway point of the year. In June, I had read 89.6% books by white authors and 10.4% of books by authors of color. So this definitely has improved. Like, it's better, but it's not good. It's not where I want it to be. I definitely would rather it be like in the 40 to 50% range. That is my goal. I'm really going to hold myself to it. And also in June, I was tracking like the sexual preferences of my authors. I was trying to, but I've just realized that that's really hard to track. You don't know. I don't really need authors to tell me that unless they want to. So I stopped tracking that in the second half of the year, but I did try and track whether a book was owned voices or not. And this includes both race representation as well as sexuality representation. So 76.3% of the books that I read were non-owned voices, but 23.7% were owned voices. I also improved these stats from my June reporting. So in June, I had read 83.3% of books were non-owned voices, whereas 16.7% were owned voices. Improved that, but I still would like to have that figure even higher. Next, we're going to talk about the source, like where I got my books from last year. The highest stat where I got most of my books was from my owned TBR. I just included books that I had prior to 2020 as well as books that I bought in 2020 as part of my owned TBR. I didn't really separate them in any way, but 34.9% of the books that I read in 2020 were books that I owned in some capacity. 26.9% of my books came from the library. Most of these were via Libby audiobooks. I did get a couple physical copies from the library throughout the year, but most of them were on Libby. 10.2% of the books I read came from Scribd. I mostly just listened to audiobooks over there. As you can tell from earlier, I consume a lot of audiobooks, so I have lots of different sources for audiobooks, and Scribd is another one of those. 5.9% of my books actually came from Book of the Month. I tracked these separately from my owned TBR for some reason. I don't know, because it was an option on this spreadsheet. 4.8% of the books that I read were borrowed from somebody else, either my mom or my friend Nick or somebody else that I know in real life. 4.3% of my books came from Audible. I actually thought this stat was going to be higher. I'm kind of surprised that it's not, but sometimes I buy audiobooks on Audible and then they just sit there and I don't listen to them because they don't have like the due date that I have from the library or Scribd. I got 2.2% of books from publishers. This is NetGalley. I didn't get sent any books from publishers. I just got approved for ARCs on NetGalley, so I counted it there because there wasn't really like a better way to track that. 1.6% of my books were gifted to me, probably for my birthday or Christmas or something. I don't know really why I tracked that. I probably won't track that next year because that's not really that interesting to me. I'd rather just put them on my own TBR, you know? And then 9.1% of my books came from some other location. I think probably most of these are like Kindle Unlimited books or some other, you know, ebook place. I don't know exactly where I marked other. Probably if I just couldn't remember when I was tracking my stats 6 months after I read the book. But that is where I got all of my books from. I think this is kind of interesting, but I'm really glad that my own TBR was my highest stat, even though it's not like super high. It was over a third of the books that I read in 2020, which I'm happy about because obviously I'm always buying books and need to read them. So now let's talk about genres. I think I have been tracking more genres than what I was tracking in June. We're just going to go in alphabetical order because that's how I have them in this little handy dandy chart. But starting with classics, I read 3 classics in 2020. I couldn't tell you what they are. I don't know why I read so few classics. I usually actually read more classics, but whatever. So that broke down to 1.6% of all of the books that I read in 2020. I think contemporary is my highest read genre, and I included like literary fiction in here, probably some like contemporary romances, but probably mostly literary fiction actually. Of those I read 54 books, which broke down to 29% of my reading for the year. Next I have dystopian, and for that I read 7 books. This was, I think, just the Selection series and the Hunger Games series, but that ended up breaking down to 3.8% of my reading for the year. I actually did read a lot of fantasy. I know I say that I don't read a lot of fantasy, but I do read some. I just don't really like high fantasy and high world building is usually what I mean when I say I don't like fantasy. But like I love things like Cemetery Boys and The House on the Cerulean Sea, like that kind of fantasy I'm really into. I actually ended up reading 29 fantasy books in 2020, which broke down to 15.6% of my reading. I then read 6 graphic novels, which broke down to 3.2% of my reading for the year. I read 3 historical fiction books, which is 1.6% of my reading. I read 6 horror books, which is 3.2% of my reading. Magical realism, I read 7 books, made up 3.8% of my yearly reading. I read 12 mysteries for 6.5%, 6 nonfiction books for 3.2%, 7 paranormal books for 3.8%, 2 poetry books for 1.1%, 20 romance books, which was another really high category. Most of these, I feel like, ended up on my worst books of the year list, so maybe I should cut back on how much romance I read because I'm not liking it that much. Although The Hating Game did end up in my top 3, so there's like gems, you know, that makes me read all the other ones, but all the other ones, they're just okay. Okay, anyway, 10.8% is romance books. I read 1 sci-fi book. I don't know why I didn't read more sci-fi. I usually like sci-fi a lot, but whatever. And that made up 0.5% of my reading. Then I read 23 thrillers, which is my new love. I discovered this genre this year. I don't think I had read a single thriller prior to this year, and now I absolutely love it. And that ended up making up 12.4% of my reading for the year. So that's all the genres that I read. I'm very tired now. Let me add up my average rating for the year really quick because I didn't calculate that for some reason. Hold on. Okay, so my average rating for the year was 3.48 stars. I don't really have a lot to say about this. It makes sense to me. I would like it to be higher next year just so I know that I'm like reading more books that I like. But other than that, it is what it is. In 2020, I did DNF 2 books, which I didn't count in any of these other stats. I don't know why. I might count them next year, but I didn't count them this year. But in 2020, I did rate 9 books 1 star, which was 4.8% of my reading. So not too bad, but still not great. I would ideally like to have no 1 stars because I'd like to enjoy everything that I read. Like I said, it is what it is. I rated 6 books 1.5 stars, which is 3.2% of my reading. 16 books got 2 stars, which is 8.6% of my reading. 26 books got 2.5 stars, which is a dead average rating for me. It's not really bad or anything, but that was at 14%. 11 books got 3 stars for 3.9%. 37 books got 3.5 stars, which was my most common rating at 19.9% of my reading, and I guess that makes sense because my average rating for the year was 3.48. So what is that? The median and the mean are very similar. I don't know if I'm using the right word. It's been a while since I've had a math class. Anyway, 21 books got 4 stars from me, or 11.3%. 31 books got 4.5 stars, which is also pretty good, my second highest category, and that is 16.7%. And I actually read 29 5-star books in 2020 for a total of 15.6% of my reading. Some other little stats that might be interesting. The longest book that I read this year was The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. This had a total of 1,256 pages in it, and then the shortest book I read was the play by Ira Levin called Death Trap, which I read for my Reading the 8 Perfect Murders books reading vlog. And I forgot to get the other little Goodreads stats that Goodreads gives you before it disappeared, and I can't find it anymore. So that's that. So those were all my bookish stats for 2020, but I did kind of want to go back and watch both my 2020 reading goals video and my 20 books to read in 2020 video, kind of react to them, see if I met my goals or, you know, read the books that I said I was going to read. So let's do that now. I'm going to pull them up here on my computer. This video is called 2020 Bookish Resolutions. Please don't go back and watch it. The thumbnail, I look very angry. So let's proceed. Good, it's only 6 minutes and 45 minutes. Oh my god, this is so awkward. Jeez, okay. I'm just gonna skip through and see like what my actual goals were instead of sitting here and watching this whole thing. Okay, so my first goal was to read 150 books. I already talked about that. I did in fact meet that. I exceeded it by 26 books for a total of 186 books. I'm very happy with that.
Second, I want to read all of the books that I have owned prior to 2020.
So my second goal was to read all of the books that I owned prior to 2020. I don't think that I met that goal. I honestly forgot that I set that goal. There are definitely at least a few books that I owned prior to 2020 that I still own and haven't read yet. I'm not really sure what they are. Honestly, I probably don't have that many because I feel like I bought so many books this year. I don't feel like I have ones that were like pre-2020, that many at least. I don't know for sure about that, but obviously I didn't track it, so I don't really know is the answer to that.
My third goal is that I want to read 12 classics throughout.
We also already talked about this. I only read 3 classics in the year of 2020, so right now we're 1 of 3. I set the goal to read 12 nonfiction books, which is a goal that I also set for 2021. I did not achieve this, but I think I did read more nonfiction than I usually would. I ended up reading 6 nonfiction books in 2020, so I got halfway to this goal, and this goal was really just to read more nonfiction books in general. I wish I had read more, but I did read 6, so I did better on this goal than I did on the classics goal. So this is an interesting goal. I don't actually know how many Stephen King books I read in 2020. Let me double check. Okay, so I did not achieve this goal. I only read 3 Stephen King books, but to be honest with you, Stephen King isn't really an author that I want to read as much of as I did back then. Like, I don't really like how he rates women in his books, and I just think he is a little bit homophobic and sexist and racist, and I think that he definitely has a huge impact on pop culture, but I think I've read most of the really popular ones at this point, so moving forward, I'm not sure that Stephen King's really an author I want to focus on anyway, so I'm not mad that I didn't achieve this goal. I don't know how many of these I read in 2020 actually. The Boxall's list of 1001 books to read before you die is kind of something that's been on my radar for a long time that I like kind of want to work my way through, but at the same time it's not like I'd rather focus more on books that I enjoy than on checking books off a list, so I didn't really keep track of this after the first couple of months of the year, and I don't really feel like going through now and seeing how many of them I read. I probably did read at least 6 of them, but I don't really know that for sure, so this goal doesn't really matter that much to me. So the Around the World in 52 Books Reading Challenge is a reading challenge that I completed in 2017, 2018, and 2019, I think, and I guess I wanted to do it again in 2020. But like everything else, this kind of fell to the wayside, especially when I started really being consistent on BookTube and all of that stuff. So this is also something that I didn't keep up with. So the only goal we've achieved so far is the numerical yearly reading goal. Not doing so hot, but did anybody achieve their goals in 2020? I don't know. If you did, very happy for you, but at the same time, like, I'm a lot chiller and nicer to myself for not meeting my goals this year because it was a crazy year, as we know. I also did not participate in the Pop Sugar 2020 reading challenge. Surprise, surprise. I also did not participate in this book club. I think that I did for the first couple months of the year, but it fell to the wayside. It was not a priority. Although I did have a very structured year of reading, I had a structured year of reading in a very different way from what I thought that I would at the beginning of 2020, apparently. I think at the beginning of 2020, I was very much like wanting to check off goals and lists and that kind of thing. And I still wanted to check off goals and lists, like that's just the kind of person I am, but I transitioned that into reading books for videos. And I definitely am glad that I did that. Like, I made such interesting content that I'm really proud of in 2020. Some of my favorite videos that I made this year were my secret TBR where I read books recommended to me by the YouTube algorithm, and then another favorite was the video I made where I read all of the books mentioned in 8 Perfect Murders. And I'm also super proud of my Goodreads video where I read the top 10 fiction nominees according to Goodreads. I love that video. So I really made some really cool content that I'm really proud of this year instead of focusing on these reading goals that I set myself at the beginning of 2020 that just felt kind of arbitrary to me as the year went on. So I'm glad that I made that pivot and I'm not mad about it. I'm not mad that the only goal out of 10 that I achieved was the amount of books I read, and that's really the only goal I want to make sure I meet every single year, you know? Like, the other ones were just kind of, like I said, they felt arbitrary by the end of the year, so I'm not mad about it. But that's that. If you were interested about my 2020 reading goals, please don't go back and watch my old videos. I don't want to take them down because I'm like, what if one blows up and gets me a bunch of watch time? But they're so embarrassing that I might archive them. I don't know what to do. All right, now let's go and watch the video of like the 20 books I want to read in 2020 video and see how many of those that I read. You can just, like, my cousin started making my thumbnails right there at the worst books of the year, or the worst books of the decade video that I made, and they just look so much better. I was not very good at making my own thumbnails. Alright, let's see what's in this video. This video is also only 10 minutes, which is nice. I feel like my videos are so freaking long now. Well, we just saw a book that I have not read yet, so that's fun. I'm just gonna skip through again. We're not gonna sit here and watch this whole video, but why am I like this? I did not read A Clockwork Orange, so 0 for 1. I have also not read 𝗕𝗁 by 𝗤𝗃 𝗃𝗯. I also did not read Rebecca, and Caroline just recently read Rebecca and didn't really like it, so I don't really have the motivation to read it, but I do kind of want to read Rebecca out of the ones that have been on this list so far. I must have been really into like wanting to read classics and be smart at the beginning of my booktube channel. Like, what was I doing? Why is this book on this list? I don't know. Did not read this. I think we've learned that Rachel Hollis is problematic recently, so also all of these self-help books are all the same thing. Like, I don't know why I wanted to read this at the beginning of 2020. I don't want to read it now. And I didn't read it, so I'm kind of interested in this, but 23 now, which I'm not quite halfway through my 20s, but I'm already into my 20s, so I'm like, maybe it's too late for me to read this book. So there's the first one that I did read. I did read In Order to Live by Yeonmi Park. Oh, there's a more Stephen King. I did not read Beautiful Things. This is my mom's favorite Stephen King book, so of any of them, I might read this one in the future, but I just don't know. He just gives me weird vibes. I'm not sure I'm going to read any of them, and I haven't read this one. I did not remember this one was on this list. Honestly, I didn't remember any of these on this list, but especially not that one. I did not read The Goldfinch. I did read The Secret History, though, by Donna Tartt, and I did really like that. So I might try and read The Goldfinch this year, but I did not read it last year. I did not read Middle Game in 2020. But I do own it, so eventually I'm gonna read it, I think. I don't know if I would like it though. Like, I feel like it's a booktube staple and that's why I bought it, and like Kayla from Books and Lala really likes it. So that was like, I think, my main motivating factor in buying it, because I really trust her recommendations, but I don't always like all of her recommendations, and I feel like this might be one that I might not love, but I do want to give it a shot because I own it, so to be determined. Another one that I read, I did read The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet this year. I read that for the Queer Lit Readathon back in June. So number 2. Oof. I did read Love and Other Words by Christina Lauren, and it was the worst book I read in 2020. So, whoops. Another one that I read, The Hating Game, on the other hand, ended up as one of my favorite books of the year, so that's very funny to me that they're back to back, but it was in my top 3, but you can watch my best books of the year video if you want to learn more about that, because I did read The Hating Game this year and I loved it. So I think that's 4 that I've read out of this list so far. I did not read Well Met by Jen DeLuca in 2020. It's one that's on my TBR, but it's not like top of my TBR. I might get to it eventually. I might not. I don't have any opinions about it. I also read The Cruel Prince. I read this when I read Chandler Ainsley's Favorites. So this is book number 5 that I have in fact read. Another one that I've read. I read this book when I read Mary's Favorites, and I actually ended up really liking this one. I think I gave it 5 stars. It was really good. So that's 6 books. My attitude in this video, like, what am I doing? I did not read 𝗬 and Dove in 2020. I'm not really mad about it. I'm not that interested in reading it. I'm not sure why I put it on this list, to tell you the truth. I've not read this. I do own it, although I feel like I need to look into Jay Kristoff as an author because I'm not sure he's someone I want to support. I feel like I've heard rumblings, but I haven't researched it yet. So, haven't read this one. Got another Jay Kristoff, Nevernight. I'm not super interested in this one anymore. I've just heard some weird things about it, so I don't know. I'm not sure why 2020 Jessica was interested in it. I couldn't tell you. I did not read The Toll. Kind of want to reread the whole side series. Like, I read the first 2, but I don't remember anything that happened in Thunderhead, so I kind of just want to start the trilogy over again and like read them all together, but I do still want to read The Toll. I just didn't read it in 2020. And that was the final book on that list. So I read 6 of those 20 books, which was honestly better than I thought because I had no idea what was on that list. So I did read a couple of them, but not all of them, and I think some of them I probably will just clear out of my TBR because I'm not super interested in them anymore. So those are my 2020 reading stats and whether or not I met my 2020 goals. I really hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching and being here. I really appreciate it. Let me know down below any interesting reading stats you had in 2020. I am such a nerd for stats, or if you made a stats video, I would love to go and watch it. So let me know down below. And if you made it all the way to this point in the video, give me the emoji with the little nerd glasses because we are talking math, being smart cookies. And follow me on Instagram and Twitter if you feel so inclined, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!